Ever since I was a kid, I've always had an interest in military equipment, but above all else, armored vehicles. In every game of Battlefield, I always wanted the tank. There was just something so intriguing about 50 tons of steel with unmatched firepower and protection, rolling up and changing the tide of the fight. I grew up, my interest changed, but that didn't. At around 20 years old, it was my time to enter the military. And it was crystal clear to me what I wanted to do. You guessed it, to be a tanker. And that's what this video is going to be about. Because as I spent more time with armor and read books about famous Second World War tank aces, I realized that pop media and video games really don't shed light on some of the biggest misconceptions about what it's like being a tanker. Doing research, these things weren't just my thoughts, but nearly all tankers experience more or less the same feelings, regardless of where they live, whether it was 80 years ago or today. And I really don't see this topic being opened up to the general public because, after all, the big guns and loud engines are what most people care for. To start off, I want to discuss tankers' everyday life. Well, it splits into more like two parts. There is the barracks part and field part, but both contain the same aspects. In the barracks, tanks are mostly maintained, and there you learn about a lot of theory on how the vehicle should be used and maintained. It soon becomes very clear that even though it's an incredibly expensive machine, made to withstand a beating, well, it's still just a machine, and no machine works if it's not properly taken care of. In many ways, not so different from your car. You need to make sure everything remains well lubricated, down to the individual road wheels and hatches. Tracks need to be properly tensioned, and this is just scratching the surface. So that's the first thing. These machines don't just keep themselves intact. And then comes perhaps the more interesting part, that being the life on the field as a tanker. The absolute first thing is that your life on the field will completely revolve around that tank. I know many tankers can relate to this, from what I've experienced, read, and studied. A lot of the times the day on the field would go something like this. When you wake up from your tent, you pack it up and move all your gear onto the tank that has been camouflaged nearby. You take down the camouflages, strap your tent and sleeping bags and whatever else you had to the tank. You do a basic check to see that the tank is ready to go. Then you mount the vehicle, and it's cold, I mean very cold. That amount of steel does not warm up in minutes like your BMW after a night of sitting in below freezing temperatures. It takes hours. If you're from somewhere very warm, this might not be an issue, but, well, then it goes the other way around. You're locked in a hot box. Luckily, many today's tanks have air conditioning that makes it way more manageable. But then again, they did not have that in Stalingrad, and I can't even begin to imagine how awful it was. But that's a topic for another time. But as your day begins and you start doing whatever it is that you do today, like exercising, it's very often that you only stop to quickly eat an MRE and take a pee, then continue. As the sun sets and you're ordered to take shelter for that night, you'd be forgiven if you thought the day is nearly over, but this is where the maintenance aspect raises its head again. First, you camouflage your vehicle so it cannot be so easily scouted. After that, you clean the bore, clean any additional weapons on the tank. Check that everything is good externally. If there are any issues, this is the time to do what you can about them. After that, you can unstrap whatever you need to set up camp for that night. Then comes the very normal military stuff like new orders just when you're about to go to sleep, setting up a guard perimeter, and all that fun stuff. Now repeat this for 2 weeks. Well, if you're in a war somewhere, make that 2 months. This is when you realize tanker's life is not just shooting and scooting with AC/DC banging. Well, it's also that, but that's the exception, not the rule. To add a little on that, when you hear that cannon firing for the first time, you realize that none of the games or movies do justice to it. You can feel the sheer force vibrating on every water molecule in your body following is the deafeningly sharp blast. But anyways, All this is actually what really welds the tank's crew members together, that being a very big part of a well-operating vehicle. It can be very demanding and requiring patience. The same goes for operating between individual tanks. To work together, it's important that they know they can rely on each other. Tanks are also not impervious to all types of terrain. While they can traverse various terrains, they are not immune to obstacles. Extreme conditions like swamps, dense forests, or steep hills can pose challenges even for tanks. Turning on soft terrain or hitting a rock on a wrong angle can throw off a track surprisingly easily. That's where training comes into play. A good tank crew must identify all these micro risks, not driving through buildings like they do on Hollywood. Another thing I want to touch on is that, especially now that the conflict in Ukraine has popularized news outlets and other sources talking about tanks, it really rings in my ear when I hear sentences like, "tanks are useless," or "this tank is better than this one and wins it every time," etc. Really, what I learned and what can be studied is that the training of the crew and how competitive the officers running the unit are seems to weigh a lot more in the big picture than the individual characteristics of a tank model. Every single tank can be made useless if it's misused. Tanks are, after all, made for very specific tasks, and if deployed correctly, they can do it very well, again from 80 years ago to today. I won't be getting in-depth about this on this video. There was a lot I didn't touch in this video, but these are some of the things that sprung to my mind about what tankers are actually like. But hey, tell me your experiences and views in the comments. And of course, subscribe if you feel inclined.